You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got breaking news here on an issue that you and I have been following for a long time. We have a resolution to the dispute between Rudy Giuliani and the two Georgia election workers that he defamed. So first off, what happened here?
Yeah, Brian, what happened here was a real surprise. We have a settlement. A settlement has been reached between Rudy Giuliani and the two Georgia state election workers, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, that he defamed, repeatedly defamed, savagely defamed. And after a defamation trial, a jury awarded those two women $148 million. And Brian, ever since that verdict and that award was handed down, those two women and their lawyers have been battling with Rudy Giuliani and his lawyers, trying to get him to satisfy that money judgment, trying to extract his assets from him, his bank accounts, his real property, his personal property. And there has been a good bit of litigation on that score. And courts have actually ordered Rudy Giuliani to give over some of his property. For example, his $5 million apartment in Manhattan. That was an earlier ruling from a judge. He had to give it over to begin satisfying this money judgment. So today, there was to be another phase of the litigation where the issue to be litigated and resolved by a judge was whether Rudy should get to keep his home in Florida, which is reportedly worth $3 million, or whether he would have to give that over to Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman as well. And much to our surprise, instead of hearing about that litigation commencing, we learned there was a settlement where somehow Rudy Giuliani must have come up with enough money, enough assets to satisfy Shay Moss, Ruby Freeman, and their lawyers to enter into a settlement agreement to put an end to all this litigation so they could stop forever chasing Rudy Giuliani and his assets. Remember, two judges, one in New York and one in Washington, D.C., found Rudy in contempt for the way he had been handling himself during this litigation. So there has been some kind of a settlement, but here's the thing, Brian. The settlement agreement is confidential. So we know that Shay Moss, Ruby Freeman, and their lawyers were satisfied with this settlement agreement, but we don't know what the terms are.
So Giuliani gets to keep his homes and his personal belongings in exchange for compensation, but they were already going to get compensation in addition to his homes and personal belongings. So why settle? They'd already won. Giuliani had exactly zero leverage here. So why would Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman give up anything?
Yeah, Brian, another great question. Why settle? Why give up anything? You already won, and you were just trying to collect your winnings. Well, I think the answer is because collecting their winnings was a real uphill battle given the games Rudy Giuliani was playing with his assets. Remember, he even tried to go into bankruptcy court to protect some of his assets, but the bankruptcy judge discharged the case because the judge found Rudy wasn't even being straight with the judge or the bankruptcy court. So this was not an easy proposition for Shay Moss, Ruby Freeman, and their lawyers trying to collect on this $148 million jury award. So the reason they decided to settle was Rudy must have put up enough money or property or something of value to satisfy them, that they were no longer interested, and it was no longer in their interest to keep fighting this battle to collect from Rudy Giuliani. But it's really frustrating for those of us who have been watching this story, following this story, who were, really pretty upset by the fact that somebody like Rudy Giuliani, back in his capacity as an attorney for President Trump, then President Trump, was defaming the good people who were standing up and doing the hard work of monitoring and working our elections. He gets to defame them, and then they have to chase him to try to collect on a money judgment. And now we don't know. We don't know anything about the terms of the settlement. For example, did Rudy Giuliani pay pennies on the dollar, or did he pay them, who knows, $100 million to get them to settle the $148 million award that they are owed. We don't know. Who provided the money, the assets, the things of value that apparently Rudy Giuliani used to win this settlement agreement, right, to the satisfaction of Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman? We don't know. So, yes, we have been watching this from the outside, trying to figure out, how this litigation would end up, how it would resolve itself. And now, because the terms of the settlement agreement are confidential, we're not going to have any answers to those questions. But here's the thing. Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman and their lawyers are satisfied with this settlement agreement. At least we can infer that is the case because they decided to voluntarily enter into it. So however much they got, and from whatever source those assets came, we may never know, but at least we know the two women who were defamed and who won that money judgment are satisfied with the terms of this settlement agreement.
Glenn, Giuliani released a statement and he wrote, "This resolution does not involve an admission of liability or wrongdoing by any of the parties. I am satisfied with and have no grievances relating to the result we have reached. I have been able to retain my New York coupe and Florida condominium and all of my personal belongings. No one deserves to be subjected to threats, harassment, or intimidation. This litigation has taken its toll on all parties. This whole episode was unfortunate. I and the plaintiffs have agreed not to ever talk about each other in any defamatory manner, and I urge others to do the same." So Giuliani says this litigation has taken its toll on all parties, as if he was also some victim instead of the perpetrator here. What do you make of this statement, which is just rife with both sidesism, which just casts Giuliani into this light of victimhood, even though, again, he is responsible for all of this?
Brian, what do I make of that statement? Not much, which is pretty much what I make of every statement by Rudy Giuliani in recent years. Someone who has been disbarred in multiple jurisdictions, someone who has been found to have defamed Georgia state election workers over and over and over again in order to pay $148 million, somebody who's been criminally indicted in a RICO case down in Georgia and indicted out in Arizona. I don't make much of anything Rudy Giuliani says, but I want to zoom in on one piece of that statement, which is really intriguing. Now, it raises more questions than it answers, but that piece of the statement involves Rudy Giuliani saying he gets to keep his New York co-op. Now, unless I'm misreading something, or unless Rudy has multiple co-ops in New York, I don't think that's the case. A judge already ordered that he had to turn over his New York property, his New York home, to these two women to satisfy the money judgment entered against him. So it looks like even though a judge ruled that he would lose his New York home, he's saying under the terms of this confidential settlement agreement, he actually gets to take it back. He gets to keep it. What does that suggest, Brian? To me, it suggests that somehow Rudy Giuliani came into a whole bunch of money to help him dig out of this extraordinary financial problem he was experiencing, owing $148 million and not having nearly the assets to satisfy that judgment. It's been reported that Rudy's net worth is estimated to be somewhere around $10 million, and I think that included the co-op in New York and his home in Florida. So, again, it raises more questions than it answered. Where in the world did the assets come from that Rudy Giuliani apparently used to negotiate this settlement agreement with Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman? Talk about curiouser and curiouser, but it seems that we may never get answers to those questions.
Glenn, where does Giuliani stand as of right now with regard to whether or not he can actually practice law?
Where can Rudy Giuliani practice law? Let's see. There's nowhere. I mean, the reporting is, Brian, that Rudy Giuliani lost his law license in New York. He lost his law license in Washington, D.C. I don't know whether Rudy Giuliani has other law licenses out there other than in those two jurisdictions. I have seen no reporting that he has a third or a fourth law license anywhere. Anywhere you want to practice law, you have to be admitted to that state bar or to the D.C. bar, D.C. not being a state, of course. And And I haven't heard anything about Rudy having any other law licenses than the two that were revoked, one in New York and one in Washington, D.C. So as best we can tell, based on all the reporting, Rudy Giuliani can practice law now exactly nowhere.
Well, finally, is this the end of the Giuliani saga as it relates to these Georgia election workers, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman?
Is this the end of the Rudy Giuliani saga? Well, maybe, as you say, as it relates to those two Georgia state election workers, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, maybe this is the end of the saga because the reporting is they've reached a settlement agreement. Now, inferentially, Brian, I think that suggests Rudy Giuliani has delivered or has satisfied Shay Moss, Ruby Freeman, and their lawyers that he has the ability to deliver on this settlement agreement. Heck, he might have already paid out on the settlement agreement. I can't imagine the lawyers for those two women would have entered into a settlement agreement that Rudy can easily renege on or refuse to comply with his own agreement, only to have those ladies and their lawyers have to run back into court and begin this sad game all over again, chasing Rudy Giuliani to get him to comply with what he owes. So I have to believe this is probably the end of this particular saga, this predicament for Rudy Giuliani, but he has so many more predicaments ahead. As we've discussed, he has other criminal cases that are pending against him. He has other civil suits that have been brought against him and that, as of right now, are not yet settled. So, he is far from out of the woods, but this may bring to a close this particular litigation.
Well, something tells me that this won't be the last that we hear of somebody in Trump's orbit defaming elections workers on Trump's behalf. So for those watching right now, if you'd like to follow along as soon as we have any more legal updates, please make sure to subscribe. I'll put the links to both of our channels right here on the screen. You're watching The Legal Breakdown.